Welcome to No Question About That. This is United Inc., our football finance show with subprime goals, also known as Jamie.
Thank you very much, Ed. Pleasure to be back, and hopefully we've got some more insights to share with people.
Oh, we certainly have, yeah. I'm glad you're not wearing the orange jumpsuit this time. Orange jumpsuit, white wall, I was a bit worried. I've got to say, have you been rendered somewhere?
No, I made it
free.
I made it out.
Yeah, very good. Good escape plan. I've seen Escape from Alcatraz, so yeah, I know.
Yeah, and we've all seen Shawshank Redemption as well.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you'd go through that sewer, wouldn't you? All right, today we've got for the fact that not much has happened since we last talked. There's actually quite a lot to talk about. So we're going to do a little bit of an update on where we are post Q3, some analysis on our cash position. You put out a very good tweet on this one, and which provoked quite a lot of comments. So we'll go through some of that. You're thinking about where United are cash. Very important, of course. People will always forget this one. We'll talk a little bit about transfers, why they're taking so long, what it actually means to do a deal of £60 million. Got to quote it in dollars, right? Because that's what the Athletic says. $80 million. 240 billion yen, just to inflate it. We'll talk about what the worst case scenario might look like on sales, because right now there's quite a lot of good reason to panic about that, or what the upside might be if you want to be more positive about this, and some other stuff around the market which might affect United, the merry-go-round on transfers, some sell-on clauses we've got, and so on. Sound good?
Let's get into it.
So let's talk about the cash position, because I thought this was an interesting take from you, and is very true. United's cash position is quite perilous compared to, if you look a couple of years ago, where we had a couple £100 million cash on hand, and now we most certainly do not, and are committed quite aggressively to spending some of this cash. So what's your initial impression of where United are right now?
Yeah, so look, we obviously discussed the 3Q results in great detail, and they were definitely more on the positive side. And I think, the positives were the profit and loss position. But the real important thing, which we've discussed at even greater length, is how, in order for United to kind of be the financial powerhouse that I think many of us still associate the club with being, they need to have the cash to do that. And, I was reading something earlier today talking about Liverpool, and I think, as much as it pains us to say this, Liverpool are almost doing now what United used to do, which is they have the commercial revenue, they've got success on the pitch, they're now flexing their muscle in terms of the cash that they have available to them, the Florian Wirtz transfer being a prime example of that. But
extraordinarily huge transfer. Like, they're committed, it's £250 million they've committed to that deal. And in wages and transfer fee, and it's massive, but they can do it, right?
Yeah, and I probably never thought that they would do a transfer like that, with particularly like Michael Edwards going back to the club. But
it's not exactly moneyballing, is it? So.
No, I mean, if it is, I'm really looking forward to seeing just how good Florian Wirtz is going to be. But in terms of the United position, the cash that they have available now, the cash that's sitting in the bank, is about £75 million. They've then got another 140 million available through the credit facility. So that means they've got 215 million available to them to spend if they wanted to spend all of it. Over the next 12 months, we know that there's going to be monies paid out for historic transfers. So this is something that Sir Jim told us about in his interview.
You mentioned 89 million.
Yeah. Exactly. We're going to have to then pay over the next 12 months about 2/3 of the Cunha fee, including the agents and intermediary fees and all that sort of stuff. And there's also another 133 million on other historic transfer fees, which will happen after the summer. Yeah. So all of a sudden...
And this is separate from a PSR calculation, because the Cunha deal will be amortized over 5 years, but we're paying a significant amount. In fact, we're only paying it in 3 chunks, 2/3 of which is in the next 12 months, as you say, and separate again from an accounting position, which is very, very different actually from PSR. And I think people get confused between the two often. But
no, and that's a really valid point. The P&L versus cash flow, two entirely different things, and we are focusing on cash. But the cash requirements over the next 12 months is going to be about 275 million. So that leaves us short of about 60 million. Now, if you look at how Omar Barada speaks in terms of making sure that we're living within our own means, balancing the books, we kind of know that any savings that are made on player sales and the wages that come from that are going to be reinvested back in the squad. Next season, if you assume that basically their overall profit, and in accounting terms, this will be something called EBIT, earnings before interest and tax. If you think that we're going to be approximately break even, which we've discussed in the past is probably ballpark before we talk about transfer activity, then that means they should actually be generating about 200 million in operating cash. People are going to try and ask the question maybe, okay, well, if you're break even, how are you generating 200 million in cash? Well, the EBIT includes the depreciation and amortization from historic transfer fees. That is currently running at around 200 million pounds. So going back to the simple maths, you've got a net cash deficit of about 60 million. But you're going to generate another 200. So that means you've got 140 million left as you go into next summer. Now, again, going back to Omar Barada's comments in the United We Stand publication, the club really want to live within their own means. And this is something that, we've discussed and I think is absolutely possible for United. They always used to be, run themselves in this way. But that then means things like the credit facility we won't hang or shouldn't be hanging on to forever. So if you want to pay off the credit facility, that's another 300 million.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
So
this is a really interesting, and I know you're going to wrap it up, but it is a kind of interesting way that United perhaps hadn't had to think about in the past. Well, definitely didn't have to think about, didn't really was such a financial powerhouse, but also were very liberal with how we'd use that cash, revolving credit facility, at least in, the last 5 years also. But also, on the other hand, the way that City, Chelsea, and now Newcastle, and to some extent Aston Villa, have not had to worry about because of owners willing to inject money. Now, they've had a PSR problem, Chelsea, Villa and Newcastle, City not so much, but they never have to worry about cash, right? And it's probably, without digging into the City accounts, because some of them are quite hidden in group companies and stuff like that, probably why they can get what feel like such good deals, right? They may well be paying up front for some of these because they never have to worry about cash on hand, ever.
Yeah, and you've mentioned this in the past, and we obviously mentioned Florian Wirtz, like when we did the Harry Maguire deal way back when.
Paid it all up front.
All up front. And that was the competitive strength of United at the time.
Yeah.
And it was, I remember reading something earlier this week. It was like, the reason why United hadn't done that well on player sales post-Fergie kind of ever was because they always had the cash that they didn't actually ever really need it as a revenue or as a funding source. Mm-hmm. Other clubs, as you say, City or Chelsea are a prime example of this. The amount of funds that they've been able to generate from, say, academy prospects, you're racking up close to, I think, over £500 million.
Yeah, it's a fourth revenue stream. Yeah,
exactly. It all adds up.
The market, and we're going to go into player sales in some more depth, but the market really does respond to strength of team as well. Obviously United are not in a great negotiating position right now, but we also don't have a reputation for generating high quality young players and selling them. And we always want to sell at the wrong time, right? So we're selling players when they are deemed surplus to requirements and therefore not that attractive. And we have very high wages, and we have now not so much, but historically had a very high wage bill, and wages and transfer fee go together, right? They're core and complement, as you'd say in strategic terms, right? A car and petrol, right? If the petrol's really expensive, the car has to be cheaper, otherwise people don't buy them, right? That's the same with a player and pay a fee in his wages, right? And so paying high wages means we get a low fee, because every club on the planet does the same calculation now, right? What's the total cost over 5 years? Does this make sense for us? Does it meet our valuation? And so United have been in a very, very bad position to sell and make revenue out of that. Now, in the last 4 or 5 years, before that, as you say, historically, just didn't need to, wasn't a focus of the club, clearly, and we probably missed out on a few £100 million from letting players go cheaply. We have done, and we're going to talk about this in a bit, been a bit smarter in recent years with sell-on clauses and stuff like that, which is going to create some free money.
Totally. And I think, wrapping up that point on cash, if you think about the ownership structure, if you think about the financing, all of this points to us needing more money in some way, shape or form.
Yeah.
And there will be a choice ultimately, which is, do the ultimate leaders and owners of the club want to supercharge this or fast track it or not?
And there may be a conflict there, no?
So, exactly. And that's good. I think that's going to be a great room to be in when those conversations and negotiations are happening. But I think quite simply, that's what it boils down to, because when you put in the bigger picture of, well, okay, we've got a stated goal of building a new stadium now, and that needs to be funded. Well, okay, you can get your profitability up by having a slightly lower wage bill, but that is going to take time. If you don't have the on-pitch performance and the additional revenue streams that generates, both on-pitch revenue and then the commercial benefits of that, put yourself in a really, really difficult position.
Yeah. Now, if we weren't in this current ownership structure, if it was just Sir Jim or the Qataris or whoever, right, then it would be a lot easier to think about how you do that refinancing or how you inject owner funding just to maintain the cash position, because he could float cash and it not be, you don't have to, you can think about it separately from PSR. Now, with the current ownership structure, that's really hard, right? So it's unlikely Sir Jim would put more money in without equity in exchange, because it's just improving the position for the Glazers. He did in the initial sales document. I think we now know that was basically a demand from the Glazers. They knew the club was running out of cash, and he did it. Would they dilute their position so Sir Jim could increase his share ownership? Is it going to be staged like that? We also have on the horizon the majority of our bond maturing in 27, middle of 27?
Yeah.
So, and it's about 3/4 of it, something like that. And then there's another tranche in a couple of years later. It leads to some, as you say, fascinating conversations about ownership, power, ego, money, which is all the Glazers care about, and ultimately the success of United or not, or maybe even the how fast is our pathway towards being the United of old again. Exactly.
And I think, all of this, in terms of the way that's manifesting itself at the moment, Cunha deal done, Mbumo looks like it's on the way to being very, very close.
I think we're coming to the climax there, yeah.
Yeah, if that's the right transfer lingo. But that basically uses up all of United's capacity to spend in terms of PSR that's been freed up, PSR capacity that's been freed up from free transfers leaving, and then, ability to spend in terms of cash.
Yeah.
So then, we come to sell to buy, and then, I think there's lots of people getting frustrated as to, well, okay, why does it take so long?
It's a great question, isn't it? And Mbumo and Cunha, you can almost tell that story in just those two transfers, can't you? I mean, Cunha, Wolves had no choice. Set price, fee in his contract. He obviously had ambitions of a better career than Wolves, no disrespect, and all of that. You know, when football fans say no disrespect, they don't really mean that, do they? They mean total disrespect. But United were able to execute that quickly because of that release clause. The only negotiation was around the payment terms. That was the only leverage that Wolves had. But that happened relatively quickly, especially for United. You know. And Mbumo, on the other hand, he's got 1 year plus one. So Brentford have some leverage. The player has, without going on strike, deleveraged it a little bit by making it clear to the market and absolutely everyone, bar Newcastle journalists, that Manchester United is the only choice here for him. He'd made that choice, and so that's the only piece of leverage United have. And it's almost balanced in a way, right? We know it's going to happen, but you know, how far are United prepared to go to Brentford's oversized demands versus their valuation of the player?
I think that sums it up beautifully, and I think this is where, if United were being really coy, they wouldn't have done the Cunha deal. They would have waited, got Mbumo over the line, and then done Cunha. But maybe that's lesson learned for next time. And I think actually, look, the reality is, you probably would have been saving at most 5 to 10 million. And there is also the downside that, you know, at the moment, there's a quoted fee for Garnacho, as I understand it, of £70 million. Well, Brentford could have just, you know, if the Cunha deal hadn't have happened, they could have just benchmarked Mbumo to that 70 million. So
yeah, and then we know that clubs do this and all the time, because those anecdotes have come out over the years about chairmen pointing to other sales and purchases, and United have boxed themselves in more than once historically, and it's probably playing out here. I mean, everyone can point to Anthony and go, look at that. Huge transfer mistake that it'll take some time for United to unwind, both in terms of like the money, hopefully it gets unwound this summer, but also the reputation it built for being deeply foolish, right? And going to 4 times their own valuation of the player. Fuck's sake. Like, everyone's going to want to pull your pants down if you're that easily cucked, as we were at the time. But yeah, I mean, it looks like it'll get done at 55 plus 5, and then negotiating over the terms of those 5. You know, Brentford will want it, and understandably for them, given our current sort of success position as a sporting project, they'll want those 5 to be as easy as possible and not winning the Champions League, Club World Cup, in Gianni Infantino's Interstellar Cup, or whatever he comes up with next.
Yeah, no, totally. And I think on the buying side, and why deals can be done quicker or potentially easily, if the player isn't in demand or the selling club are desperate, you can kind of then get into a good ballpark of like what's the lowest you can get away with. And I think the prime example of this was Lyon and Cherki. You know, Lyon, of course, have now been relegated to Ligue 2 as a result of not having enough cash to fund themselves,
service their debts. Yeah.
And that's, you know, created a whole vicious loop with Crystal Palace and John Textor, who also owns Lyon. But I think, you know, that also sums up pretty nicely, like, to a degree, the position that United are in, trying to sell players as well this summer. Like, we're not necessarily as desperate. You know, the club can operate as a going concern, but in terms of, you know, pace of change and be able to reinvest in the squad, well, then we've got a bunch of players that, as you say, you know, the players aren't necessarily massively in demand. If they are in demand, you know, can the buying club afford it, or what's the lowest you can get away with?
Yeah. Well, let's go through some of these deals and like talk about the differences, because we've got Garnacho, Rashford, Anthony and Sancho. Those are the four big ones that, for various reasons, we assume there's no possibility of reintegrating them into the squad. Garnacho appears to have fallen out with his manager and half of the Manchester United fan base through his social media activities. I found that funny, but not everyone does. Got some people frothing at the mouth. Marcus Rashford, we feel like all bridges are burned. You know, I think there's a theoretical path to fixing that, but it doesn't seem very likely at all. Sancho, the club will not have him, even if Amorim wanted him. So absolutely not. He's done us dirty, and they're like, be gone. And Anthony, the club just wants the biggest upside possible, right? So Garnacho, I think they can ask for a big fee because they can benchmark his performance, 21 goals and assists last season, against other young players. He's got a very long contract. He's not on massive wages, which means the fee can be bigger. So it might not get 70. We might think that's ridiculous. I'd avoid all the noise. They can ask for a big fee, because if we were buying a player of that profile, they would ask for a big fee. Yeah. And it might not end up at 70, but if both parties are determined to make this happen, then it should be a big fee.
And I think if it was 60, I think that's also fine.
We'd all feel pretty good about that, I think, given that will all return to the P&L and the PSR position. So Rashford, a little more difficult, I think, just because of his very high wages and market perception around his underperformance. I thought Onana, the Aston Villa midfielder, did us a solid there by bigging him up in an interview recently. I don't know whether you saw that one, but
yeah,
he was very complimentary about Marcus Rashford and very critical of pundits and the media and their take on Marcus. So, but he is earning, well, take off the Champions League bonus, and he's earning somewhere around $250,000 a week, something like that. It might not be that much. We don't know exactly, but that's the kind of reported figures once you take off the Champions League piece. And but the scenario there, I think it's heading towards another loan. You talked about that actually in your tweet, that and your previous analysis, that it's actually, even though you don't get a fee, get most of the wages off, it's pretty beneficial.
Yeah, I think, look, if we take, in very simple terms, like, what would be the worst case scenario across all of these deals? And this is probably slightly unrealistic, but gives us a floor. Let's say we don't sell any of them and they're all loans, and only 50% of the wages are covered.
It's a pretty bad scenario.
That's a pretty bad scenario. Potentially for Sancho and Rashford, like, somewhat realistic, maybe slightly unrealistic for Anthony and Garnacho. But that alone is 20 million in savings, both in terms of cash and PSR. So, like, when I look at that, I'm like, well, okay, that still gives a little bit of wiggle room to do something else in the market. Maybe it's only one player, but there is something there.
And you kick the sales down the road for another year. So that beneficial PSR value from selling, getting a fee, is still on the horizon. Not for Sancho, in the last year of his contract. So that's it. Yeah, but worst case scenario, loans, 50% of wages covered. I actually think that's two worst case.
There might be two worst case.
Yeah, I mean, it seems unlikely. I mean, I think United will get a sale for Garnacho. It's just what the total fee is. He's not so burned. I mean, no other club is going to care about slightly snarky social posts. It's a completely different calculation. The deleverage that we got from the story coming out that Amorim had told him to fuck off in front of the rest of the squad, that's not awesome, because it does put United in a position as obvious sellers, but the mitigation for that is 4 years left on his contract, right? It's going to motivate everybody, especially Garnacho, who thinks a lot of himself. I did love that. It's not a financial point. I love that anecdote that he's wearing a Marcus Rashford Aston Villa shirt as a kind of troll, with the exiles, I assume. And Marcus's people had let it be known that they thought he was he thinks he's the next fucking Ronaldo, in a very dismissive sense. The pettiness and the childishness of all of that amuses me quite a lot. So, but that's a non-financial point. What's the worst case scenario with Anthony? Because we'd had reports recently where Betis were looking to do a deal, although they're selling Johnny Cardoso. It's obviously to bring Anthony in would probably be their biggest ever transfer. To meet our PSR floor would be, 32.5 million or something like that.
Yeah.
That they want to basically loan him, option to buy at half, and we'd get half that price, and we'd get a 50% sell on for down the line, which is a very creative way of doing this deal. Would not be good for United immediately for PSR, but could have a benefit down the line.
Well, and I think
what do you think of that kind of structure?
Well, I think it's a bit of I think it's literally a halfway house, right? Like, you get some of the cash in, 15 million for Anthony. I mean, I'm not sure Anthony's wages are quite as high as what's
apparently they're not that high. Yeah.
So I think, like, the benefit to Anthony is, okay, yes, PSR, but also cash if we can get the 30 million fee. I need to double check this as well, but I'm actually not certain that co-ownership of players is allowed anymore. I know it used to be prevalent.
I don't think it would be co-ownership. I think it's been framed like that in the media, and it's more like low fee, massive sell-on. And it's not actually co-ownership. It's just that we own 50% of the economic rights. I think it's a mistranslation in some of the reporting. Yeah, so it would be and if it was 50% of future sale, not future profit, that could look very attractive if he does very well at Betis and becomes a target for one of the larger Spanish clubs, for example.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't be overly keen on that. You know, like, he's 25, and okay, yes, he's had a good season at Betis.
But can you see a 50-60 million pound transfer having taken place in the future, which is what United would need for it to be a positive upside on this? Yeah,
exactly. Like, can you really see, you know, particularly with transfer fees in general, you know, like in Florian Wirtz aside, like, some of those mega deals just aren't quite as prevalent. Is Anthony going to be one of those in 2 years' time? Not sure.
Feels unlikely. Yeah.
Look, I think, you know, Betis will, if they really want him, they'll have to find a way. There has been reports of Anthony saying, look, he's willing to take a wage cut, and so, you know, there's probably ways to structure a deal that can somewhat be reflected in the deal price as well as a result of that, and that will help get the deal done. But I think for Anthony, nothing against the player, but from a financial perspective, I think it's one where you just got to kind of get the deal over the line and get it done.
Yeah. And even so if it was under the 32.5, United would take an impairment charge. They'd have to, like, amortise the rest of his book value effectively. But then going to 25-26 accounting period, there is zero amortization, right? You just get rid of the problem. And so it's painful this year, beneficial next year. Either way. And so United might end up having to think about it like that. But, I mean, taking an extra amortization hit just basically takes away from our capacity to fund another deal by however many millions we are underneath that, right? So that could be bad. Sancho, on the other hand, I mean, as soon as that deal with Chelsea didn't happen, the scenario of us terminating his contract and paying like half of it and coming up with a negotiation so he can go became much more real. Although reports in the press seem fairly credible about a potential transfer to Fenerbahce. Was it Fenerbahce, I think?
Yeah, Fenerbahce and Mourinho.
They won't pay a £25 million fee. Just look at the historical fees that Turkish clubs pay. They're paying large wages, but not big fees. But honestly, if it was £10 million as a fee, with the money we got from Chelsea, that would be net okay, fine. Right?
Yeah, net on PSR terms, that'd be fine, because it's about 14 to 15 million break-even fee for Sancho now that, you know, he's only got 1 year left. I also think Turkey may have some legs here as a destination. I was trying to figure out before I said that whether there was a weird pun in that. I don't think so.
It is, but that's all right. That's all right.
I think Turkey may have some legs, and the reason I say that is that a deal for a Turkish team buying someone like a Sancho is probably more affordable for a Turkish team than it is elsewhere in Europe. Now, why is that? I think it's because of the tax structure in Turkey, which we're about to get into some really nerdy stuff here, but effectively, things like taxes on income for footballers in Turkey can end up being only 20%. And so whilst they have a higher kind of social security cost that the employer, i.e. the club, has to pay, actually there's a big saving that they can make on wages. And I think we've seen this already with Leroy Sané. So
yeah, they effectively outbid Bayern, who were offering him a new contract.
Exactly. And they've guaranteed, well, I say guaranteed, they're paying Sané 9 million base salary net of taxes and 3 million in bonuses per season. That in gross costs to Galatasaray before social security, that's like 15 million euros a year. For a UK club, just as a reference point, they would have to pay 24 million euros a year. So close to a 10 million saving. If you look at Sancho, he is probably earning net of taxes about 7 million pounds. For an English club like United, that's basically costing them, in terms of like cash this year, 15 million pounds. For a Turkish club, that, including the NI, that only costs them 11. So it's actually cheaper for them to kind of continue to pay Sancho that same wage.
No, it's a great point. It's a great point. And almost the opposite of the luxury tax that you have in France, the super tax that players end up paying, even if they go to Monaco, which is because French clubs threaten to kick Monaco out of Ligue 1 unless they change that around. Yeah, very, very weird that you'd pay an additional tax in a tax-free country, but there you go. No, it's a great point. It's a great point on Turkey, and one of the reasons why they are attractive, but do not spend big fees. Yeah. So that's the worst case scenario. I don't think will happen. I'm less bullish on better case scenarios, at least for Rashford. Post Villa not making the Champions League, that was an easy deal to be done if they had made the Champions League. I think it was always conditional. And on Sancho, once that Chelsea thing broke down, seemingly because Sancho wouldn't agree to one of their heavily incentivised lower upfront free wages, which is a little odd for him because, is that the most important thing for him? Well, we'll see. If he goes to Turkey, that will give us an answer. And given he's only got 1 year guaranteed at United left, right? So he's got that guaranteed. The rest of his next 5-year contract is not, right? And so getting that guaranteed for a player like Sancho, whose career is on the nosedive, would feel like a good thing to do. And you wonder whether he's been advised the right way. If he secures a deal to Turkey, then fine, good for him. Maybe that league will suit him as well, career-wise. We'll see. All right. Other stuff that's happening in the market is kind of interesting because it does have some knock-on effects. So we talk about the sell-on clauses for the Alvaro Fernandez Carreras deal, which is going to happen. The player's been playing in the Club World Cup for a pretty shitty Benfica side. Real Madrid wanted him in for that one, and Benfica said no. A little bit petty, but looks like the deal to Real Madrid is going ahead. And a massive fee. Man, it's like 50 million euros, 45, 50 million euros, something like that. You have to have a 20% profit. What does that equate to?
So that, I think the numbers that I did, I think it equates to about 7 million altogether.
Bad. Free money.
Which isn't exactly. And I think, I think some people thought that the clause might be a little bit higher, but there's been some reports, I think, out of Madrid, which are from relatively reliable sources, that it's actually a little bit lower. But I think even at 7 million, like, that's fine for effectively.
Yeah, that would make the deal to Benfica effectively it was 6 plus 7, 13, about right for a young player who hadn't really played at all. I mean, if we were City and had the reputation, that might have been 20. and so on, or 15 plus 5, and that's where we want to get to. So we'll make it horrendous. Anthony proposals from Newcastle to take him at 45. We also have something like a 20% sell-on profit there. That would look like a similar kind of fee coming into United.
Exactly that. And look, whether Forest would be inclined to sell Elanga.
I mean, if I was Forest, I'd take, given his numbers. I mean, I know he had a good season, but I would bite their hands off because they could definitely moneyball 45 million, or let's call it 38. And what's their pure profit? They paid 15. The 20, so 23, 24 clear on that deal for 2 years of Anthony, and go reinvest that elsewhere. They've proven themselves to be reasonably astute in the market now. Once they got beyond their like splurging on every player you'd never heard of, they've done some good deals. I'd bite their hand off. I mean, it's not the 45 million. They have to think of it in terms of book value and all of that kind of stuff. But I would do that deal. That feels like the best number that I'll ever get for that player.
No, totally. And I think it's a similar amount to what was proposed last year by Newcastle. So when you consider the fact that his book value will be lower now, there could be even more of a reason to do that.
Yeah.
So so both of those together could be like 13 to 15 million altogether.
Free money. Free money, yeah.
Free money, improved PSR, can help fund some astute, clever player purchases. So I think those are all going to be positive. And I think actually there are a lot of players that United sold with sell-on clauses. And so, look, those two are the ones that seem most immediately in front of our face right now in terms of potential deals. But I think there is further upside potentially to come, somewhere down the line from those.
Mason Greenwood being the prime example, really large sell-on, and also apparently, in accordance to reporting, not sell-on of profit, sell-on of the total fee, because he's proven himself. I mean, he's got 20-something goals, second top goal scorer in Ligue 1 this year, and that would be very attractive for an awful lot of clubs, and knowing the quality of the player and all of that. So at some point he may want to move out of Marseille. Marseille's a massive club in its own right, and crazy mad fans.
Oh,
fantastic city to live in, and all that.
Fantastic.
Yeah, I really like Marseille. I liked it ever since I saw The French Connection, and I enjoyed it when I went there as well. That's one for older heads. That is, what a film. You've had here Darwin Núñez to Napoli as a point to think about.
Yes, and I think that one could be interesting just from a perspective of what happens to Victor Osimhen.
Yeah.
So, depending on what fee Napoli pay Liverpool for Núñez, and Liverpool playing hardball on Luis Diaz with Barcelona may help us on a Rashford deal. I imagine they'll probably negotiate a pretty good fee for Núñez, and so that may almost create a floor for what the Osimhen fee has to be for Napoli.
Mm-hmm.
And so when we think about also Garnacho in the equation, I think that's just one to keep an eye on in terms of if that deal does happen. And then the other one that I'm keeping my eye on at the moment is Barcelona in general. And that's mainly obviously for the Rashford deal. So as a bit of background, La Liga have some spending limits that they place on clubs and are published each transfer window. And there's been a bit of a verbal tete-a-tete between Laporta and Tebas.
These guys should just fuck. Just get the tension out of the way, Go for it, lads.
But so technically Barcelona can buy whoever they want, but the key for them is all about who can they register to actually play in La Liga. The steps in their financial regulations, I think, are fascinating in terms of it's not just you have to sell and you can use that money to buy. They actually limit how much. Barcelona want to get what they call 1-to-1, right? As in every euro they sell, they can then spend. And they've been at a ratio of 3-to-1 at one point. They had to sell
€3 to get one back in their transfer budget, just because their financial position was not so great, and La Liga didn't buy all the levers, which I wouldn't either. And neither did the private equity firms that have invested in Barca TV, for example, now regretting their particular spending.
And had to take a write down, I think, on the valuation in their latest accounts. But yeah, basically, Barcelona need to sell players to free up capacity to spend. They're
trying to sell younger players at the moment, and they want another forward. They need another forward. As brilliant as Rafinha, Lamel and Lewandowski are and were last season, Lewandowski's not getting any younger, and they're one injury away from being quite short in forward areas. So that's why they're looking at Diaz and Rashford and so on and so on.
Exactly. And I think they've just moved on Fati to Monaco on loan. I think there's another 6 or 7 players that they're potentially trying.
How much do you think they regret not taking Ed Woodward's $100 million offer for Ansu Fati, and how much of a bullet do we dodge? Yeah, well, brilliant player. Injuries just destroyed him, I think. Yeah.
Hey, look, they may not have any spending issues if they had managed to sell him at the right time. But yeah, just them selling players or getting players on loan, I think, are all going to be important for the Rashford deal. They're another club where I don't think cash is necessarily an issue, but the restrictions that have been put on them is. They've already sold, or they've already moved on 2 players. I think Clement Lenglet and I can't remember the name of the other player. But
one of the younger defenders they're selling on.
That's gone to Como. Balde, maybe.
Oh no! Anyway. Really? Did Balde go, the left back? I forget. There you go. Great analysis from us there, but yes. I mean, the one thing that Barcelona have as a kind of strategic advantage over everyone else, despite their financial position, is their ability to churn out, really high-class players out of La Masia. Everyone in Europe is looking at that going, have we not been able to replicate it? I mean, part of it is the fact that they are the biggest club in a very large area. The whole of Catalonia, effectively. They don't really have any competition for the best players in that area, and they're very attractive to young players who they do take away from other clubs. But that is free money. Like, they churn out these players. They either go into the first team and it's a player they don't have to buy, or it's the player they can sell for some very good fees sometimes.
Yeah. And look, sorry, the player was Alex Valle, not Balde.
Alex Valle, okay. Not Balde.
But, bringing it back to United and recent news, obviously Nick Cox has left, and I think he's done an incredible job at, I think, levelling up the academy from where they were. Yeah,
2016, and we got smashed 9-0 by City and all of that, right? So, yeah.
And I think whoever comes in is kind of starting with a real good, solid foundation, and it's like, where can you take it from here? And I think someone who is adept at, I think, doing right by the player, but also getting the transfer and the deal values right for those players is going to be critical, because whilst there is lots of talent in that academy that's proving itself at the moment, the reality is they're probably not going to be another class of 92. If they are, fantastic, but we're going to need someone who can really, from a financial perspective, at least kind of keep Manchester United's interest as well as the players' interests at heart.
And absolutely. And Johnny Evans has returned to the club as a player liaison for loans. That's a pretty important role. You want to make sure those loans are going well. It's important from a financial perspective, because it's either a pathway into the first team at United, or you want them to have the best loan possible so you can then sell them. You don't want what happened with Ethan Wheatley, who's a very good young player, went to Walsall, didn't play at all. You can't sell him now, right? He's going to have to... And not that I'm suggesting United were trying to sell him, but if they were trying to sell him this summer, it'd be very difficult to do that because there's no proof points. So when City sold James Trafford for 15 million plus 5, and he never played a minute of Premier League football, you're like, bloody hell, but he'd had a couple of good loans, proved out his quality. And right now, United would probably take James Trafford as a replacement for Anana. So yeah, absolutely, that'd be very important. Academy director, plus also under 23's first team coach is also needed. That's part of the pathway. It's a hard hurdle, that one, I think. The player. So, but we almost couldn't wish for someone better to make that decision, make that call. It'd be very attractive. There'll be a lot of applications for that position. A lot of people would want it. And Jason Wilcox, having been in that role himself at City, like, he must have a very fat black book of similar profiles that he must have. I don't think we could have a better person to make that call now as the director of football.
Totally. And, you know, Christopher Favell, who's also there, with some of his experiences, I think he will also know a fair few people. And so don't necessarily need a swift decision, just make it a good one.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Fantastic. So we're running out of cash, so GM, open your wallet is the message from this. Again, yeah. You've got a very, very large wallet. Use it. Unfortunately, let's hope. Very hard pivot here. Very hard pivot, but stay with me. Peace deal in the Middle East. Very, very good. Please, from a human perspective, from geopolitical perspective, but also we don't want the oil price spiking, because that is what Ineos spend their money on, to turn it into these little plastic pellets which they sell. High fuel costs means Ineos in real trouble. That's bad for United. You're following? So, peace in the Middle East is part of Make United Great Again. Thank you very much.
What an ending.
What an ending. Jamie, Subcrime Goals on Twitter and Blue Sky, and your Substack. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Ed. Until next time.
Bye now.